I never believed in ghosts. That is, until the night I spent in the old Blackwood Manor. It was supposed to be a simple job, photograph the historic house for a real estate listing. But what I experienced there would change my life forever. The sprawling Victorian mansion loomed before me, its weathered facade a testament to nearly 2 centuries of history. As I approached the front door, key in hand, a chill ran down my spine despite the warm summer evening. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the musty scent of age. My footsteps echoed through empty halls as I set up my camera equipment. The fading daylight cast long shadows across ornate wallpaper and antique furnishings. As I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. More than once, I spun around, certain I'd seen movement out of the corner of my eye. But there was never anything there, just still air and silent rooms. Night fell, and I decided to get some shots of the house's exterior in the moonlight. As I stepped onto the wraparound porch, a gust of wind slammed the front door behind me. I tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Locked out. Great, I muttered, fishing for the key in my pocket. My fingers closed around empty space. The key was gone. A soft giggle drifted on the breeze, and I froze. It sounded like a child, but there was something off about it, a hollow quality that made my skin crawl. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast darkness of the overgrown garden. "Is someone there?" Another giggle, closer this time. I fumbled for my phone, using its feeble light to scan the area. Nothing. Suddenly, a small figure darted past me, disappearing around the corner of the house. It moved too fast for me to make out details, but it was definitely child-sized. "Hey, wait!" I called, giving chase. As I rounded the corner, I skidded to a stop. The yard was empty, but there, glinting in the grass, was the house key. My hands shook as I scooped it up and hurried back to the front door. Once inside, I slammed it shut and leaned against it, heart pounding. "Pull yourself together," I whispered. "There's a logical explanation for all of this." But as the night wore on, that became harder and harder to believe. Footsteps creaked overhead in empty rooms. Doors opened and closed on their own. And always, that feeling of being watched. Around midnight, I was setting up a shot in the grand staircase when my camera's viewfinder caught something that made my blood run cold. There, at the top of the stairs, stood a woman in a long, white nightgown. Her face was obscured by tangled black hair, but I could feel her eyes boring into me. I lowered the camera slowly, praying it had been a trick of the light. But she was still there, motionless. As I watched, frozen in terror, she took a single, jerky step forward. Who are you?" I managed to choke out. Her head snapped up at an unnatural angle, hair parting to reveal a face that was little more than a skull with stretched, gray skin. Her jaw unhinged, opening impossibly wide as she let out an ear-piercing shriek. I ran. Out of the foyer, down the hall, not caring where I was going as long as it was away from that thing. I found myself in what must have been a study, slamming the door behind me and fumbling for a lock that wasn't there. Panting, I pressed my ear to the wood, listening for any sound of pursuit. Nothing. Just the thundering of my own heart. As my panic subsided, I became aware of a soft scratching sound. It was coming from the massive oak desk that dominated the room. Hesitantly, I approached. The scratching grew louder as I neared. It seemed to be coming from inside one of the drawers. With trembling fingers, I grasped the brass handle and pulled. The drawer flew open with such force that I stumbled backward. A cloud of dust billowed out, and when it cleared, I saw a leather-bound book lying inside. As I watched, words began to appear on its cover, written by an invisible hand, the Blackwood Grimoire. Against my better judgment, I reached for the book. The moment my fingers touched its worn leather, a jolt of electricity shot through me. The room spun, and suddenly I was no longer alone. Spectral figures filled the study, men and women in clothing from various eras, all with the same haunted look in their eyes. They swirled around me, their voices a cacophony of whispers. "You shouldn't be here. It's too late. The house never lets anyone go." I clutched the book to my chest, backing away. "What do you want from me?" The spirits parted, and a small boy stepped forward. He looked solid, almost alive, until I noticed the gaping wound in his chest. "We want to be free," he said, his voice echoing as if from a great distance. "But only the living can break the curse." "What curse?" I asked, but the boy was already fading. "Read the book," he whispered as he disappeared. "Finish what was started." The other spirits vanished, leaving me alone once more. With shaking hands, I opened the grimoire. Its pages were filled with arcane symbols and rituals, interspersed with journal entries dating back to the house's construction. As I read, a chilling story unfolded. The original owner of Blackwood Manor, Ezekiel Blackwood, had been obsessed with the occult. He'd used the house as a focal point for dark rituals, trying to gain power over life and death itself. But something had gone horribly wrong. The final entry, written in a frantic scrawl, spoke of a ritual gone awry, of a door opened that could not be closed. Ezekiel had bound his own soul and those of his family to the house, trapping them in a limbo between worlds. The sound of footsteps in the hall snapped me back to the present. Slow, dragging steps, punctuated by the tap of what might have been a cane. "Who dares disturb my rest?" a raspy voice called out. "Who meddles in affairs beyond their understanding?" I held my breath, pressing myself against the wall beside the door. The footsteps stopped just outside. "I can smell your fear, intruder," the voice growled. "Your living flesh calls to me. It has been so long since I tasted life." The door handle began to turn, achingly slow. I clutched the grimoire tighter, my mind racing. There had to be something in here, some way to protect myself. As the door creaked open, my eyes fell on a page near the back of the book. A banishing ritual. It was my only chance. I began to recite the words, my voice shaky at first but growing stronger with each syllable. The temperature in the room plummeted, and the air crackled with unseen energy. A figure loomed in the doorway, a tall, gaunt man in a black frock coat. His face was a mass of writhing shadows, but I could feel the fury radiating from him. "No," he roared, lunging toward me. "You will not undo my work." But it was too late. As I spoke the final words of the ritual, a blinding light filled the room. The shadowy figure let out an inhuman howl, its form unraveling like smoke in the wind. When the light faded, I was alone once more. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the house all night had lifted, replaced by a sense of peace. Had it worked? Were the spirits truly gone? As if in answer, a warm breeze gusted through the room, carrying with it the faint sound of laughter, joyous this time, free of the hollow quality I'd heard before. The trapped souls of Blackwood Manor were finally at rest. I sank to the floor, exhausted but relieved. As the adrenaline wore off, questions began to flood my mind. What had I just experienced? What were the true limits of reality? One thing was certain, I could never look at the world the same way again. The veil between our world and the next was thinner than I'd ever imagined, and I had glimpsed what lay beyond. As the first light of dawn crept through the study windows, I gathered my things, including the grimoire. I couldn't leave it behind, not after what had happened. Its secrets were too dangerous to fall into the wrong hands. I stepped out onto the porch, blinking in the pale morning light. The house behind me stood silent, its dark history finally laid to rest. But as I walked to my car, a chill ran down my spine. The grimoire in my bag seemed to pulse with a faint, otherworldly energy. I had banished the spirits of Blackwood Manor, yes, but at what cost? What door had I opened within myself? As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that my journey into the paranormal was far from over. In fact, it might have only just begun. In the weeks following my experience at Blackwood Manor, I tried to return to my normal life. But the memories of that night, and the grimoire hidden in my closet, haunted me. I found myself jumping at shadows, seeing movement in reflections where there should be none. One night, unable to sleep, I gave in to temptation and retrieved the book. As I opened it, a slip of paper fell out, a page I hadn't noticed before. It contained an incantation, promising to reveal hidden truths. Against my better judgment, I began to read it aloud. The words felt heavy on my tongue, charged with an otherworldly power. As I finished the last syllable, the room around me shimmered and changed. I was still in my apartment, but everything seemed off. Colors were muted, shadows deeper. And I wasn't alone. A figure stood in the corner, shrouded in darkness. As I watched, paralyzed with fear, it stepped forward. It was me, or rather, a twisted version of myself. Its eyes were black pits, its smile too wide and filled with needle-sharp teeth. "Hello, meat puppet," it rasped, its voice a horrifying echo of my own. "Enjoying your little foray into the occult?" I scrambled backward, knocking over a lamp in my panic. "What are you?" I managed to choke out. The thing laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "I'm you, of course. The real you. The you that's been waiting to get out." It took another step closer, its form rippling and changing. One moment it was my doppelganger, the next a writhing mass of tentacles and eyes. That little banishing ritual at the manor? It didn't just free those pitiful ghosts. It cracked you open, let the real world seep in. Its grin widened impossibly. And now I'm free too. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying this was just a nightmare. But when I opened them, the creature was inches from my face, its breath hot and rancid. "You can't get rid of me," it hissed. "I'm part of you now. And I'm so very, very hungry." With a gasp, I jolted awake. Sunlight streamed through my bedroom window. Had it all been a dream? But as I stood, my foot crunched on broken glass. The lamp lay shattered on the floor, exactly where I'd knocked it over in my vision. My hands shook as I got ready for work. I avoided mirrors, afraid of what I might see looking back at me. The day passed in a haze of anxiety and paranoia. Every stranger on the street seemed to be watching me, their eyes following my movements with predatory intent. That night, I I returned to find my apartment door ajar. Heart pounding, I stepped inside. The place had been ransacked, drawers emptied and furniture overturned. But I knew instinctively what the intruder had been after. I raced to my closet. The grimoire was gone. Panic clawed at my throat. Who had taken it? What would they do with that kind of power? A noise from the kitchen made me spin around. There, leaning against the counter, was a woman I'd never seen before. She was pale, with long black hair and eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "Did you take my book?" She smiled, revealing teeth that were just a bit too sharp. "My name is Lilith. And yes, I have your grimoire. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" I lunged for her, but she vanished in a puff of smoke, reappearing on the other side of the room. "Tisk, tisk," she chided. "Is that any way to treat a lady? What do you want?" I asked, my mind racing for a way out of this situation. Lilith's expression turned serious. "I want what you unleashed at Blackwood Manor. The power you tapped into?" It sent ripples through the supernatural world. Every creature that goes bump in the night felt it. And now they're all coming for you. As if on cue, an inhuman howl echoed from somewhere outside. Lilith glanced at the window, a flicker of concern crossing her face. "We don't have much time," she said. "You have two choices. Come with me and learn to control your newfound abilities, or stay here and be torn apart by things you can't even imagine." Before I could respond, the lights flickered and went out. In the sudden darkness, I heard something large moving outside my door. The wood began to splinter as whatever it was tried to force its way in. Lilith held out her hand. "Choose quickly." Heart pounding, I took her hand. The world spun around us, and suddenly we were somewhere else entirely. A vast library stretched out in all directions, its shelves filled with books that pulsed with otherworldly energy. "Welcome to the Arcanum," Lilith said. "Your training begins now." The next few weeks were a blur of arcane lessons and supernatural encounters. Lilith taught me to harness the power I had unknowingly tapped into, to bend reality to my will. But with each new ability came a price. I could feel something dark growing inside me, feeding on the magic I was learning. One night, as I practiced a particularly complex spell, my reflection in a nearby mirror caught my eye. For a split second, I saw the monstrous version of myself from my vision, grinning back at me with those needle-sharp teeth. I stumbled backward, the spell forgotten. "What's happening to me?" I whispered. Lilith appeared at my side, her expression unreadable. "You're becoming what you were always meant to be," she said softly. "A bridge between worlds." I shook my head, backing away from her. "No, this isn't right. I want to go back to my old life." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "There's no going back. The old you is gone. Embrace what you are now, or be consumed by it." As she spoke, the air around us thickened, reality itself seeming to warp and twist. The walls of the Arcanum faded away, replaced by a swirling vortex of colors and shapes that hurt to look at. Voices whispered from the chaos, some begging for help, others promising untold power if I'd just give in. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the voices were inside my head. "Make it stop," I screamed. Lilith's form began to change, growing larger, more monstrous. "This is the true face of reality," her voice boomed, "now Legion. Embrace it, or be torn apart." I fell to my knees, the pressure in my head building to unbearable levels. The thing that was once myself clawed at the edges of my consciousness, trying to break free. In that moment of utter despair, I remembered the grimoire. Not the physical book, but the knowledge I had absorbed from it. There was one last spell, a failsafe of sorts. With the last of my strength, I began to recite the words. The air crackled with energy, and Lilith's monstrous form recoiled. "No," she roared. "You don't know what you're doing." But I did. As the final word left my lips, the world exploded into blinding light. I woke up in my own bed, sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment, I dared to hope it had all been a nightmare. But then I saw the grimoire on my nightstand, its pages blank. The spell had worked, after a fashion. I had reset reality, erased the supernatural incursion I had inadvertently caused. Lilith, the arcanum, the monsters, all of it was gone. But as I caught my reflection in the mirror, I knew the price had been steep. My eyes now held a hint of otherworldly knowledge, and I could feel the power still coursing through my veins. I had closed the door to that other reality, but I couldn't unknow what I had seen. The world would never look the same to me again. As I got ready to face the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. I had glimpsed the true nature of reality, and that knowledge came with a responsibility. There were other grimoires out there, other doors waiting to be opened. And now, for better or worse, I was the one who had to make sure they stayed closed. I picked up the now blank grimoire, feeling its latent power. Whatever came next, I would be ready. The war between our world and the supernatural had only just begun, and I was on the front lines. As I stepped outside, the sun seemed just a little dimmer, the shadows a little deeper. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the barrier between worlds might be restored, but it was thinner than ever. And somewhere out there, in the spaces between reality, I knew Lilith and the others were waiting. Watching. Biding their time until they found another way through. The true horror, I realized, wasn't the monsters or the magic. It was the knowledge that they were always there, just out of sight, waiting for someone to open the door again. I squared my shoulders and walked into the city, hyper-aware of the hidden world lurking beneath the surface of everyday life. My journey into the paranormal might have ended, but a new, even more terrifying chapter was just beginning. The grimoire in my bag pulsed with a faint energy, a reminder of the power and the danger that now lived inside me. Whatever came next, one thing was certain: I would never forget the true face of terror I had witnessed, and the responsibility that came with that knowledge. As I disappeared into the crowd, I couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes were watching my every move, waiting for the moment I let my guard down. The war for reality had only just begun, and I was the reluctant soldier on the front lines.